I'm not going to be on camera the whole time. I just wanted to show my face and introduce myself. My name is Ben. I'm one of the lead consultants at CIT. I've been with the company for almost 2 years now. I've got around 12 years experience within the IT industry. Security has always been one of my passions. So today I wanted to talk to you about data security. So without further ado, all right. So obviously I can't hear or see any of you, so I'm just going to make the assumption that all my jokes are hitting the mark and that you're all in hysterics most of the time. So hold the applause and cheers until we're finished, please. Now, data security, also known as information security, can be a large, complicated subject. My goal today is to provide you with a high-level overview of the subject and provide you with enough information to be able to identify and make informed decisions on your and your organization's data. So, data security. Working. Cool. A subject that encompasses almost everything we do in modern business. And in recent years, it's become a lot more important. It seems that every other day we're hearing about large companies getting hacked and customer data being leaked to the internet. With technology these days, it's easy to lose track of your data and overlook something that can cause potential issues. So the first thing I want to discuss is identifying your data. So, as I said before, data is all around us in modern business. With the universal use of technology, accessing that data is easier now than it ever has been for everybody, including those that we don't necessarily want accessing our data. So when we talk about data, what are we talking about? Again, there's huge amounts of types of data, but some of the more common and arguably some of the most important ones are personal data. Personal data has been at the forefront of data security in the past few years, mainly due to the implementation of GDPR back in 2018. Obviously, personal data has always been important, but perhaps it wasn't given the priority it should have until GDPR. So I'm not going to go into any details about GDPR because that is a whole nother webinar in itself. So what is personal data? Personal data is defined as information that relates to an identified or identifiable individual. Personal data tends to be things like names, contact details, bank account details, credit card details, home addresses, anything that can identify an individual. It's important data that you're being trusted with by that individual or by the individual. So it needs to be a high priority when it comes to securing it. Other types of personal data could include customer data, inner leg size of that customer, recent order of custom-made superhero costumes for their cats, deepest, darkest fears. Again, information that's being trusted to you on the basis that it's safe. Other personal data can include information about employees, payroll info, home address, contact details, next of kin, disciplinary history, etc. You get the idea. There are lots more types of personal data out there, but to name a few. So what about other types of data? So we've got intellectual property. So what makes your business, your 7 secret herbs and spices, the recipe to your super secret special sauce, the data that makes your company what it is. Again, important stuff, not stuff that you want getting out. Financial data, some of which that can be public, but some of which you wouldn't want getting to the public domain. And internal company data, so not necessarily anything that's highly confidential or personal, but also not data that you want freely available outside of the organization. So emails, internal correspondence, project information, processes, procedures, etc. So it's all around us, essentially. It's just considering it. So we've spoken about the types of data. Let's move on to where your data is. So as with a variety of data types, the location of your data can be even more numerous, which is why this is an important section. So some locations can include emails, cloud storage, databases, servers, CRM systems, finance systems, laptops, desktops, your phone, USB drives, your filing cabinet, in your head, in a lead-lined vault, in your car's glove box, held by third parties, post-it notes, bits of paper, back of cigarette packets. It's all data. It's all information. It's all got the potential to cause issues if lost or stolen or destroyed. So anywhere that you can have things stored could be a location for data. So again, it's worth having a good think about. So we've gone over what and where. So one thing that we tend to use to help you identify where your data is, and this is something that I would highly recommend you take away from this, is a data classification policy. So as you can see, I've made a bit of an example here. So the idea around it is that it's a spreadsheet or a document that will help you identify the type and the location and the importance of the data your organization has. You need to know where it is, what it is. You need to have control of that. So and ensure that confidential information is secured. So I'll create a little example here. So as you can see, on the left-hand side, we've got the information type, customer data, employee information, inventory control. So these are very kind of overarching subjects. When you do yours, I would recommend sort of nailing down into that a little bit more and going into more specifics. So for the data location, I've got the example of customer data in the CRM. That data classification, we've classified that as confidential, as confidential. And then the next few sections at the top, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That's something I'll be going on to more in a moment, but you can understand what they mean. So classifying them against each of those. So I would take that away. It's something that can be done easily. It's something, depending on how much data you've got, it can be time consuming, but it's a worthwhile exercise. So securing your data. When we look at security within the IT industry, we look at ensuring that your data is safe. Almost everything we do for our clients comes down to ensuring the security of the data in one way or another. So when we look at ensuring the security of the data, there's three principles of information security that we do use, and that is CIA. And we're not talking about the Central Intelligence Agency here, although they probably are quite hot on information security. So there we go. Right, so when we look at securing your data, we look at CIA, as I said, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So the confidentiality of the data, ensuring that sensitive information is accessed only by an authorized person and kept away from those not authorized to possess them. Integrity, ensuring that information is in a format that is true and correct to its original purposes. Information that you can trust. Availability ensures that information and resources are available to those who need them and when they need them, as they need them. So sometimes it can be a bit difficult to ensure that all three of these principles are adhered to. For example, sometimes measures put in place to ensure the availability of the data can mean that the confidentiality of the data is compromised and vice versa. So it can be a bit of a balancing act. So what I'm going to do next is just go over each of the principles and how it relates to your data and how it relates to what we do to secure that data. So confidentiality ensures that, as I said, ensures that sensitive information is accessed only by an authorized person and kept away from those not authorized to possess. So ideally, you've done a data classification policy, so you've got a good idea of where your data is and what you have that's confidential. That level of confidentiality is dependent on the type of data, as I said, so client data and personal data should be considered highly confidential, and everything in your power should be done to protect this. So other data can be identified and classified by yourselves. So what can compromise your data? So hackers and malware stealing data, disgruntled employees leaking data, employees accidentally sending confidential data, lost devices containing data, any loss or leak of highly confidential or even confidential information can be devastating and potentially even business destroying. Even smaller scale losses can lead to GDPR breaches and potentially, and as well, a loss in customer confidence. There's a good number of consequences that can come from loss of data. So again, it's important. So what can we do to ensure the confidentiality of your data? So first, again, we need to know what type of data is there, where it's stored. We need to make sure that the location that that data is stored is suitable for that type of data, whether that be a database, a CRM system, or a file storage location. You need to make sure that those locations provide the means to protect that data. So what I'm trying to get to here is who has permission to get to that data. We need to keep it as confidential as possible. So when we look at permissions, when we look at who has access to the data, we tend to make the recommendation of using the principle of least privilege. So this means that data is only available to those who need it. If they don't need the data, they should not have access to it. Even to the point of a director not needing access to folders or documents on the server, we would remove their permissions. It's not that we don't trust them, but it decreases the surface area of attack if a hacker got in. This is all all the more prevalent for people higher up in companies because they tend to be higher targets. So, but it's also relevant for all staff. You don't want people accessing certain data that they're not meant to start off with. And you also want to reduce what access a hacker has if they did access the system through those user accounts. So a lot of the locations that we would recommend and we would use allow us to ensure that only those who need access to that information have access to it. So with servers and databases, users normally have individual logins, which will allow for granular permissions. So you can set the permissions, we can set the permissions, and ensure that everyone has access to what they need to. So, and in the same, with other data locations, if the data is stored in a cloud environment, such as Office 365, then we have the availability and the ability to set folder permissions, etc. With solutions like Office 365 and Microsoft 365, there's also the ability to go a step further with allowing users to set permissions on files themselves, as well as a number of other built-in security features that can actually help with data classification and security. So those sort of things all help with help mitigate against employees accessing data they shouldn't, and it can also cut the risk of unwanted people getting in and accessing that data. So accessing the location of the data and creating a data classification policy can also help ensure that employees don't have confidential data located in places they shouldn't, such as USB drives, work laptop, directly on the work laptops, emailed home. So knowing where your data is and knowing where it should be stored and creating policies that tell employees where that data should be going, where that data should be stored is important. Obviously, there's always going to be the need for the data to travel. So again, will the data be traveling? Ideally, we wouldn't send personal information or highly confidential information by email, but if we do need to, there is such thing as data encryption and things like that. So with the example of employee having data on a laptop or a USB drive, we wouldn't recommend that USB drives are used at all. It's just not a safe way of transporting data anymore. With the example of laptops taken out and about, they have the tendency to get lost. We've all heard in the news, MI5 agents losing their laptops in cafes, etc. So it's a good idea to make sure that any data that is important is not stored directly on the laptop. It's stored in a central location. Even if there's only the one person who needs access to that, we can set the permission so that that user only has access to it. There's a number of reasons for that, and I will get into that a little bit more. But let's say, for example, you lost your laptop. There's plenty of company information on that laptop. Anyone who picks up that laptop has the ability to take that hard drive out and scan that data. And that data is now in the public hands. And if it's worth anything, then they can sell it to potential hackers who could then do all sorts of nasty things with it. So again, something to mitigate that and something that we'd recommend, and an easy thing to do is full disk encryption on laptops. Again, with a lot of Windows computers, this is built in and has the ability to just be turned on. So it might be worth talking to your consultant if that's the case. And again, so even if the laptop's lost with data, with a laptop with encryption, if someone were to pick that laptop up, even take the hard drive out, they wouldn't be able to get anything off it unless they had the password, which hopefully is also unlikely. So again, don't leave your laptops on, don't leave your passwords on a post-it note in your laptop bag. Not a good idea. So leading on, strong passwords. So this is a big one when it comes to securing your data. I've got a little GIF here, which just gives you kind of a good idea of how the complexity and the length of the password makes a difference to how long it takes to essentially brute force attack the password. So hackers can use software to try and guess the password, and it will guess it based on what's there, and it will use random letters, and it will keep going until it gets it. So as you can see, the longer it is, the longer it will take, and I don't think anybody's got that much time. So having a robust security password policy in place is essential, whether that is a technically enforced, so on servers we can set the password policy. It should also be something that's in your own company's security policies. And again, this is not just for the laptop, this is for everything, for your CRM systems, for your databases. They should all be secured with difficult to guess passwords. I've seen it way too many times where someone's Sage login is their initials, and then the password is also their initials. You know, they've got passwords for a reason. So there's data that's specifically kept in those locations for specific reasons, and again, it's not something that you want getting out. So we've covered users accessing the data and loss of laptops, etc. So, but what about viruses? What about hackers? What about malware? Things like that. So when it comes to malware, viruses, all we can do is mitigate against it, and we tend to take a layered approach. So one of the most common hacks that we see at the moment is people hacking into users' Office 365 accounts. So again, this comes down to the availability. So an Office 365 account is a cloud-based account, and one of the upsides to it is that it's available anywhere, and in consequence available to anyone. And we find that if users don't have strong passwords, then they will get hacked, and hackers will get on, they'll log into the Office 365 account, and they will have access to whatever that user has access to. So again, it comes down to the permissions as well. So at a basic level, all that hacker would need to know is that user's email address and then the password. And they may not know the password, but they may guess the password. They may use some hacking software, and that's all they need. So two-factor authentication is what we would recommend, highly recommend for that. So what is two-factor authentication? So when you're logging into an account, your password is one factor of authentication. So two-factor authentication is a second factor. And that second factor tends to be things like a code being texted to your mobile phone, an application on your mobile phone. It's very common. A lot of people will have seen it on logging into their banking, etc. So that mitigates against people hacking into accounts by a lot. Not only will that hacker need the user's email address, the user's password, they also need access to that user's phone, which is considerably less likely than them being able to find out what the password is. So again, if you've got an Office 365 account or other email solutions, Google Mail does it as well. It's normally a built-in service that just needs to be activated. So again, it's an important one that needs to be done. It's just a case of doing it. Sorry, again, with the Office 365 accounts, there is other ways and more ways of securing things as well. So it's worth having that conversation. So how can we secure data that's stored on, say, a server? So, as I said, password policy, strong passwords, but we also need to make sure that your network is safe. So everything surrounding your server. So the way we do that is by installing what's called a firewall. That firewall is a security device that goes in between the boundary of your network and the big scary world of the internet. And those firewalls have security features on, allow us to set rules, allow us to stop things coming in and potentially going out as well. So it's one of those things that's essential. Firewalls come in different variants of security. We would always recommend the most secure that you can afford, really. It's one of those devices that is essential and one of those devices that's not worth skimping on. So that ensures that the network is safe. We also do other things like installing antivirus and security software on each of the computers, doing things like patch management, so ensuring that computers and servers are as up to date as they can, including bits of software like Adobe Reader and things like that. And this just means that if there is vulnerabilities within that software, that we can make sure that they're patched and make sure that those doors are closed to any potential nasties trying to get in. So all of these things create a layer or multiple layers of security that can help prevent. However, obviously there's a few more bits on screen that I haven't gone over, but they're just more examples. So, however, there is one big thing that can undermine all of these security measures. I like this photo. All right, so in this corner we have firewalls, encryption, antivirus software, etc. In this corner we have Dave. And Dave has a nice sweatshirt on that says human error. So yeah, we can throw technology at it, we can throw money at it, but at the end of the day, if Dave decides that he's going to open up that dodgy email that offers him some free vouchers for Amazon, as long as he puts in his password and things like that, then he's going to click that. You know, if he doesn't know that he shouldn't be sending data by email or important data by email, then there's not much that all the technology in the world can do about it. Obviously, technology helps against it, but at the end of the day, if they end up clicking the button, then it's going to happen. So user training is a very, very big thing. And again, it's not something that is looked at enough. Even basic security training is enough to make people aware and make people think about what they're clicking on, make people think about what they're doing. So that is a big one. So moving on to integrity. So the integrity of data ensures that information is in a format that is true and correct to its original purpose. When we talk about the integrity of data, we're talking about making sure it has that it is the same as it was intended to be. So we need to make sure that we can trust the data that we're looking at. The integrity of the data, changing of data, unauthorized changes and things like that could potentially also be a GDPR breach, depending on the data. So things that could potentially compromise the data. Again, only a few examples here, but deletion of parts of the data, data corruption, databases, you know, they're not bulletproof. You know, things like power cuts can cause data corruption, bugs in the software. Not something that's necessarily anybody's fault, but it's something that can happen. Employees with malicious intent can delete parts of the data, change the data that they know is important and is needed, and even accidental changes can cause issues. Malware, stuff like ransomware that encrypts that data, it destroys the integrity of that data. So again, part of resolving these comes down to, again, principle of least privilege. Those who don't need access to that data shouldn't have access to that data. We can go a step further by saying that if those users do need access to that data, but they don't need to edit it, then we can give them read-only access, which means that they can't change it. This is quite common in things like databases for sort of customer service. You know, the users have got the access to view that data when a customer calls, but they haven't got access to change that data or delete accounts or things like that. But as I said, user training as well, that will come up quite frequently. But the big thing that we can do to help against the losing the integrity of the data is by having good backups. So essentially, if we were hit by a cyber attack, if the server got encrypted, then we've lost the integrity of the data. But if we've got a good backup, then we've got the potential to go back, you know, even down to an hour an hour previously, and restore that backup, which restores the integrity of the data. Same with things like databases. You know, if an employee does decide to make changes that he shouldn't, or decides to deliberately change the data, as soon as you're aware of that, we can potentially go back to a previous time where that data is integral, has its integrity back, I suppose is the way of putting it. The only thing with that is, and again, sorry, this comes back down to making sure that data is in a suitable location. When we talk about backups, we tend to talk about the places where the data is held centrally. So on your server, in Office 365, in SharePoint, etc. All of those locations are central, you know, shared locations that can be backed up. So we need to make sure that the data is in a suitable location. Because if it's on the user's laptop and that laptop is lost or encrypted, then there is no backup unless we are specifically backing up that laptop, which is not necessarily something that we would do. It should all be in a central location. As I said, even if it's only that user who potentially needs that data, it should still just be in that central location, accessible only to that user by permissions. So that is integrity. So next is the availability of the data. So we're ensuring that the information and resources are available to those who need them. The importance of being able to access your data as and when you need it. So as mentioned before, you need to find a comfortable balance between the confidentiality of your data and how accessible it is. You don't want your data being so secure that you can't access it, and you don't want your data being so accessible that you compromise its confidentiality. So there's easy compromises that can be made, and with technology these days, it's something that can be done quite easily. So what can compromise the availability of your data? So for a lot of organizations in the recent months, being forced to work from home has produced the challenge of making sure that that data is available to those users at home. So natural disasters, you know, not just necessarily COVID-19, you know, snow days, things like that, not being able to leave the house. So internet connections. If your internet connection goes down, you've potentially lost the availability of that data. Again, it might only be temporary. Working from home, you might have a lot of users remoting into your office. If your internet connection there is not ideal, not up to the job, then it's you're going to lose availability of your data. Hardware failure, if things are stored on servers, or even hardware failure within the network. If any of those areas fail, again, it can compromise the availability of your data. Lost devices, as discussed, employees with malicious intent, and ransomware. All of these things, as well as a lot more, you know, can compromise the availability of your data. So what can we do to protect this, or protect your data, protect you from, and ensure that the data is always available for you? So as we've gone back to again before, ensure the solutions that you have in place to allow the data to be available at all times. So again, this comes down to finding the right tool for the job. And in the data classification policy, you will have looked at where your data is, and you might have come to the conclusion that that's not necessarily the right place. So, should your client data be in spreadsheets on the server, or would it actually be better to have that in a CRM system? And that CRM system, again, these days you can get cloud-based systems rather than on server systems. So looking at cloud-based systems, that is potentially has an uptime of 99.9%, always available to you, always available even if you're out of the office, always available if you're working from home, for example. So finding the right tool for the job, as I said, sort of, servers, Office 365, databases, CRM. So depending on the specifics of these systems, the majority can come with or be configured to have to give great accessibility to your data. Even 5 or 10 years ago, it would have been a lot more of a challenge to access that data from home. It would have made the recent COVID issues considerably more damaging, I would imagine. So luckily these days we've got a number of tools at our disposal that can allow users to access their work data where they need it. So I'm talking more specifically outside of the office. So these days there's not really any need, or there shouldn't be any need, to copy any documents to USB keys that can be lost. There shouldn't be any need to email documents to personal accounts. We should all be able to access our emails from wherever. With technologies like cloud solutions, VPN connections, and remote desktops, etc., users can carry on working as they had been in the office when they're at home, which has been great. So, but yeah, as I said, when we talk about the availability, we're not just talking about the technologies. As an IT partner, it's our job to ensure that your data is available to you at all times. So this means frequent maintenance and proactive work on servers, network, computers, etc., making sure that it's maintained, reducing the risk of any hardware failure, software failure, corruption, etc., ensuring your internet connection is up to the job, and essentially planning for if a disaster occurred. I think going forward, when we're doing projects, it's probably going to be quite important that, considering what would happen if this COVID thing would happen again or something else, it's unlikely that it'll happen again, but I think it's just proven that it can. So when we're planning things, when we're planning projects, when we're looking at your current infrastructure, we're looking at what if, what can keep you going, what can make sure that you can keep billing or working. So it is a very large subject, as I said, and what I wanted to do is just give a good overview and hope that and give you kind of an understanding of data security. So this is a quote I quite like. It takes 20 years to build up a reputation and a few minutes of cybersecurity incident to ruin it. And that's true. It's there's a lot of what if. There's a lot of it will never happen to me. There's a lot of it won't happen, but it can happen and does happen. And all we can do is put everything in place to either prevent it happening or plan for when it does happen and plan for ensuring that that your data is secure at all times. So as I previously mentioned, data security is a big beast. I'm not going to go through it. I'm not going to go through it all. It's not something that's completely controlled through technology. It's something that needs to be looked at from a number of angles, not just from a technical perspective. So that's part of the reason that I've shown you the data policy, so that you can take that away and have a look at where it is. Having that written down will make things a lot easier when you're trying to work out where to store it, etc. So I hope that you can take away from this knowledge that data is all around us. Data has always been there. It's part of the furniture, and it's easy to overlook the importance of it. As I said, the introduction to GDPR in 2018 started fires under a lot of industries and organizations in relation to personal data. However, we need to be putting that emphasis on all data. It's something that really needs to be taken seriously. So when I'm looking at data, I like to get into the mindset of looking at that piece of data. What are the consequences of me losing this, or what are the consequences of this getting into the public eye? And it's just a second thought, and that can save the potential of a disaster. So that is it. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, I also forgot to mention, if you do have any questions, there's a Q&A button at the top of the Zoom screen. So if you pop your question in there, then Jess will read them out.
Brilliant, thank you, that was great. We've got a couple of questions in now, but if people want to send them through, Ben will do his best to answer them for you. First of all, my team don't want two-factor authentication apps on their personal phone. What else can we do?
Yeah, we tend to get that a lot. So there's a few ways around that. If they don't want the application, then a lot of systems allow just text messages and things like that. I think it's important to know or to allow your employees to know that even if you've got a two-factor authentication application on their phone, that doesn't mean that you as an employer has any control over their phone. It's just an application that allows them to access. But as I said, there is things like just text messages, and some services even allow you to set up a telephone number, normal landline, that will give you a message over the phone. There's also kind of other hardware that can be used, but it can be costly and needs to be set up. But it depends on the situation.
Okay, and at a minimum, what do we need to be doing to protect our data legally?
Legally, not 100%. I probably couldn't say legally, unfortunately, but as I said, making sure that you know what the data is, getting familiar with GDPR. Obviously, that's a regulation, and there is consequences to losing that data, such as fines. I'd say it also depends on what industry you're in. There's some industries that have regulators of finance, for example. So it's worth doing your research on those aspects of it.
Perfect. Do you have any recommendations as to how we talk to our teams about data protection and what they need to be doing?
Yeah. So again, user training, making sure that they're aware. So for employees, I would start at the top by making sure that that you've got the policies in place to back up what you're saying, and to let employees know that there is consequences to their actions, and beyond that, then just user training, just making sure that they're aware.
Perfect. Is there a group policy to deploy disk encryption for a speedy resolution? From experience, this usually has to be performed individually and locally, which depends on the amount of laptops your company own.
I believe that there is. I can't 100% be sure off the top of my head, but I know that there is ways of rolling it out centrally, especially with things like Microsoft 365. So I think there is with group policy.
Perfect. Is there a good reference for the type of classification labels to use, like confidential, highly confidential, etc., and how these can be used in practice?
Yeah, so it's probably worth having a look at documentation online. There's all sorts of things that can help you identify the data that you've got and kind of classify it as to what it should be. Again, with tools like Office 365, again, there's built-in functions within that will allow you to classify data, and if you classify that data, it will do certain things to that data, such as encryption or things like that. So that's definitely worth asking your consultant about.
Perfect. And there aren't any more questions in there at the moment. So if anyone's got any more, if you want to quickly send them over, I'll give it a few seconds. Okay. Oh no, that's not.
Oh, Matt Riley with all the answers.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone knows, it's Matt Riley.
I think that is it then. Thank you very much, Ben.
Lovely,
And
no
if
problem
anyone
at all.
does have any other questions, please do send them over to inquiries@complete-it.co.uk and we will get them answered by the right person for you, or speak to your technical consultant or account manager if you're a Complete IT client. And thank you very much for joining us. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.